Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez was having the kind of Tuesday that made her question every life choice that led to volunteering for deep space duty. She sat in the observation deck of Outpost Artemis, humanity's first and only station beyond the Kuiper Belt, cataloging space debris with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry in zero gravity. "Another chunk of ice," she muttered, logging the 10th identical entry of the day. "Revolutionary." That's when her console exploded with alerts. Not literally, thank God, but every screen flashed red as something massive dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of the station. And when Jess said massive, she meant a ship the size of Manhattan decided to park itself in her front yard. "Holy shit," Jess whispered, already slamming the emergency beacon. "Captain Webb, we've got company," and they didn't exactly RSVP. The ship was gorgeous in a terrifying way. Crystalline structures flowed along its hull like frozen rivers of light, and it pulsed with energy that made their station look like a kid's science project. Before Captain Webb could respond, a beam of golden light shot from the vessel and swept across Outpost Artemis. Every system went haywire. Jess's medical scanner activated on its own. Her DNA analysis program opened without permission, and somewhere in the background, she heard Eddie Park, their chief engineer, shouting something creative about unauthorized access. Then the voice came through, deep, resonant, and dripping with the kind of pompous authority usually reserved for tax collectors and theater critics. "This is Ambassador Krell'vik of the Celestial Dominion, representing the authority of the royal system. We have detected a Class 1 noble signature and demand immediate audience with your sovereign." Jess blinked. Wrong number? We're just a research outpost. No sovereigns here, buddy." "Impossible. The royal system does not err. The genetic signature detected registers as Tier Alpha Supreme, highest classification in the known galaxy. Prepare for formal contact protocols." A docking tube extended from the alien ship with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Jess watched it connect to their airlock with a heavy clang that definitely wasn't in the station's safety manual. "Captain," Jess said slowly, "I think we're about to have visitors, and I don't think they take rejection well." Marcus Webb's face appeared on screen, his graying hair somehow more disheveled than usual. "Ramirez, what the hell is happening? Our systems just registered a genetic scan we didn't authorize." "Yeah, about that. Apparently some alien empire thinks we're royalty." "We're what?" The airlock hissed open. Ambassador Krell'vik entered, and Jess had to stop herself from laughing. He looked like someone crossed a praying mantis with a peacock and gave it 4 arms and a superiority complex. His diplomatic robes shimmered with colors that probably violated several physics laws, and he wore what could only be described as a crown made of condensed starlight. Krell'vik took one look at Jess, and his expression went through a fascinating journey from imperial confidence to confusion to absolute horror. Then he bowed. Deeply. "Your Majesty," he said, and he sounded like the words physically pained him. "The Celestial Dominion recognizes your supreme genetic authority and pledges its loyalty to your bloodline." Jess looked at Captain Webb's screen. Webb looked back at her. Eddie's head popped into frame, his grin splitting his face. "Did Bug Dude just call you Your Majesty?" Eddie asked. "Because I'm never letting you live this down." "There's been a mistake," Jess said firmly. "I'm a lieutenant, in the military. We don't do the whole royalty thing. We voted that out a few centuries ago." Krell'vik straightened, his compound eyes reflecting confusion. "The royal system is absolute. It has analyzed your genetic code and determined that humanity possesses the highest noble rating ever recorded. You rank above every known species in the Dominion, including the current Emperor himself. That's ridiculous. The royal system has governed galactic hierarchy for 1 billion years. It does not make errors." Eddie was laughing so hard he had to leave the frame. Webb looked like he needed several drinks and a career change. And Jess? Jess realized this Tuesday had just gotten significantly worse. 20 minutes later, Jess sat across from Ambassador Krell'vik in the station's briefing room while he explained the most absurd system of government she'd ever heard, and she'd studied Earth's history. "The royal system was created by the architects," Krell'vik began, pulling up a holographic display that looked like someone's family tree had a baby with a spreadsheet. An ancient species who sought to establish permanent galactic order based on objective genetic merit rather than conquest or wealth. Genetic merit, Jess repeated flatly. You rank entire species based on their DNA. Correct. The system analyzes genetic markers for resilience, adaptability, longevity, and what the architects termed noble essence. Species are ranked in tiers, with tier alpha representing the highest genetic achievement. Captain Webb had joined them in person now, his uniform jacket hastily buttoned. And you're saying humans rank as tier alpha? Not merely tier alpha supreme. The genetic analysis of Lieutenant Ramirez registered markers we've never encountered. Your species' DNA contains indicators of survival through multiple extinction-level events, rapid evolutionary adaptation, and genetic diversity that suggests a lineage of extraordinary resilience. Eddie, who'd installed himself at the briefing room's secondary console, whistled. So we're royalty because Earth kept trying to kill us and we were too stubborn to die. Oversimplified but essentially accurate, Krell'vik said stiffly. Your planet's chaotic evolutionary history created a genetic profile that the royal system interprets as supreme nobility. The system has automatically updated galactic records. As of this moment, humanity is registered as the highest-ranking species in known space. Jess rubbed her temples. Okay, but here's the thing. We don't want to be in charge of your space empire. We barely have our own planet figured out. Can't you just, delete us from the database? The look of horror on Krell'vik's face would have been funny if it wasn't so disturbing. Delete? The royal system is immutable. It cannot be altered, overridden, or ignored. Its authority is absolute across all Dominion space, which encompasses 47,000 inhabited systems. 47,000, Webb repeated quietly. And they all answer to genetic rankings. Indeed, the current emperor, Zethor of House Aurelian, ranks as Tier Beta Prime. He has ruled for 3,000 years based on his family's superior genetics. Until today, no species ranked higher. Let me guess, Jess said. He's not thrilled about this. That would be an understatement. Emperor Zethor is currently en route with his personal fleet. He demanded to be present for the genetic verification process, though the royal system's initial scan is never wrong. Eddie spun in his chair. So let me get this straight. We just accidentally conquered a galactic empire by existing, and now their emperor is coming here to throw a royal tantrum. Your crude assessment is regrettably accurate. Jess stood up and walked to the viewport. More ships were arriving now, dozens of them, each broadcasting diplomatic credentials and requests for audience. The station's communication system was completely overwhelmed. This is insane, she said. We're 300 people on a research outpost. We don't have the infrastructure for galactic politics. With respect, Your Majesty, you have no choice. The royal system has spoken. Every government, trade federation, and military force in Dominion space is legally bound to recognize human authority. Even I, despite my personal reservations, am compelled by both law and the system's programming to obey your commands. Wait, you have to obey me? Like anything I say? Krell'vik's mandibles clicked in what might have been distress. Within reason, yes. The royal system enforces compliance through technology integrated into all Dominion systems. Defiance is impossible. Jess turned to face him, an idea forming. So if I ordered you to stop calling me Your Majesty? I would be unable to comply. The royal system designates proper forms of address based on genetic rank. Of course it does. Jess looked at Webb. Captain, I need to go on record saying this is officially above my pay grade. Denied. You're humanity's accidental face of first contact now. Welcome to history, Lieutenant. Eddie pulled up another display. Hey boss, you should see this. I've been analyzing the royal system's scanning parameters. It's not just measuring genetic strength or whatever. It's measuring diversity and adaptability. The system values species that survived through change, not perfection. What's your point, Park? Humans aren't ranked highest because we're genetically superior. We're ranked highest because we're genetically messy. Earth threw everything at us. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, you name it. We evolved, adapted, and survived through sheer stubborn randomness. The royal system thinks that makes us qualified to lead. Krell'vik's antennae twitched. That interpretation has merit. The architect's final message, preserved in the royal system's core code, states that true nobility lies not in perfection, but in the capacity to thrive through chaos. Jess looked between them all. So we're galactic royalty because Earth was Australia on nightmare mode, and we refused to go extinct. Essentially, yes. Great, just great. She sat back down. Someone get me coffee. If I'm going to accidentally rule the galaxy, I'm doing it caffeinated. The next 48 hours turned Outpost Artemis from a quiet research station into the most chaotic diplomatic hub in human history. Ships kept arriving, each bringing representatives from species Jess had never heard of, all because the royal system decided humanity was in charge now. She stood in the newly designated throne room, which was actually just the cafeteria with better lighting, receiving what Krell'vik called mandatory diplomatic audiences. The absurdity of the situation hadn't diminished. If anything, it had gotten worse. Next, Jess said tiredly, watching another delegation approach. This group looked like ambulatory crystals crossed with squid, their bodies refracting light in disorienting patterns. Their spokesperson, whose name Jess immediately forgot because it sounded like wind chimes having an argument, prostrated themselves before her. Supreme Matriarch of the Apex Bloodline, we of the Prismatic Collective pledge our fleets to your service and beg permission to continue our trade routes through Sector 9. You have permission, Jess said automatically. Trade freely. Be nice to each other. Don't blow up planets. Is that all? The wind chime sounds intensified. Your benevolence knows no bounds. We shall erect monuments to your mercy. Please don't. They left, replaced immediately by another group. This pattern had repeated roughly 40 times today, and Jess was developing a headache that transcended normal human physiology. Eddie approached with 2 cups of coffee, looking far too amused. You're getting better at the royal decree thing. I hate you. No, you don't. Besides, check out who's in the next batch. The approaching figure was humanoid, which was a relief after the parade of tentacles and geometric shapes. She was tall, elegant, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, and eyes that held actual kindness instead of the fearful reverence Jess had been getting all day. Lieutenant Ramirez, the woman said, and her voice was warm. Or should I say, Your Majesty, I'm Lady Zorinthia of House Stellarborn. I wanted to personally welcome humanity to the political nightmare that is Dominion governance. Jess blinked. Did you just call it a nightmare? Because it is one. The royal system has kept species locked in a rigid hierarchy for millennia. Some of us have been hoping for a shakeup. Zorinthia smiled. Though I'll admit, humanity shooting straight to the top wasn't on my bingo card. For the first time since this began, Jess felt like she was talking to a person instead of a protocol. You're not scared of us? Should I be? You've spent the last 2 days giving blanket permissions and telling everyone to be nice to each other. Hardly the behavior of a tyrant. My own species' royal family could learn from your approach, assuming they could stop being pompous jerks for 5 minutes. Krell'vik materialized at Jess's elbow. Lady Zorinthia, protocol demands proper forms of address in the presence of supreme nobility. Krell, relax. If the supreme matriarch wanted me arrested for casual speech, she'd have done it by now. Zorinthia winked at Jess. See? You're already better at this than Emperor Zythor. Speaking of whom, Eddie interjected, checking his datapad. We've got incoming. Big incoming. The Emperor's personal fleet just dropped out of FTL at the system's edge. Every screen in the room switched to external view. The fleet was impressive in the way that hurricanes and avalanches were impressive. Hundreds of ships arranged in perfect formation, each one broadcasting Imperial authority codes that made Outpost Artemis's computers whimper. And at the center, a flagship that made every other ship look like a rowboat next to an aircraft carrier. Well, Jess said, I guess we're about to meet the deposed Emperor. Technically not deposed, Krell'vik corrected, merely outranked. I'm sure he appreciates the distinction. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice that could only belong to someone who had never been told no boomed through the station. I am Zythor the Magnificent, Emperor of the Celestial Dominion. guardian of the royal lineage, master of 10,000 worlds. I demand immediate audience with the human who dares claim superiority over my bloodline." Eddie grinned. "Oh, he's exactly what I hoped he'd be." Zerinthia sighed. Zythor never could handle anyone challenging his divine right to rule. This should be entertaining. Jess stood up, straightening her uniform. "Krell'vik, can you send a message back?" "Of course, Your Majesty. What shall I say?" "Tell him Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez accepts his audience request. He can dock at Bay 3, and tell him to leave the dramatic entrance at home because our station isn't rated for whatever theatrical nonsense he's planning." A ripple of shocked silence went through the assembled aliens. Zerinthia started laughing. "Oh, I like you," she said. "This is going to be fun." Captain Webb appeared on the main screen. "Ramirez, are you sure about this?" "That's the ruler of a galactic empire, and he's bringing enough firepower to vaporize our station." "He won't," Jess said with more confidence than she felt. "The royal system won't let him." "Right, Krell?" "Correct. Any act of violence against a superior-ranked species is impossible for those integrated with Dominion technology. The Emperor physically cannot harm you. See? We're fine. Probably." Jess looked at the view screen showing the approaching fleet. "Besides, if we're going to convince everyone we don't want to rule the galaxy, we need to start with the guy who actually does." Eddie handed her the second cup of coffee. "For what it's worth, if we're about to start an interstellar incident, at least you'll do it caffeinated." "That's the spirit." Jess took a long drink. "Zerinthia, want to stick around for this?" "Wouldn't miss it for anything." As the Imperial fleet drew closer, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get significantly more complicated. Somehow, a boring Tuesday cataloging space debris had turned into first contact with a galactic empire. And now she was about to tell their emperor that humanity wasn't interested in his job. She really should have called in sick today. Emperor Zythor the Magnificent entered the station like he was personally offended by the concept of airlocks. He stood easily 7 feet tall, with skin that literally glowed gold, eyes that burned like miniature suns, and a crown that probably cost more than Earth's GDP. His robes flowed despite the lack of wind, because apparently physics was just a suggestion when you'd ruled for 3,000 years. Behind him came an entourage of guards in ornate armor and advisors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The entire group radiated the kind of authority that came from never being contradicted. Jess stood her ground in the cafeteria/throne room, flanked by Captain Webb and Eddie. Zerinthia had taken a seat off to the side, looking like she was settling in for her favorite show. Krell'vik stood rigidly at attention, probably having a minor existential crisis about witnessing his emperor in a subordinate position. Zythor stopped 10 feet from Jess, looked her up and down, and his expression suggested he'd just discovered something offensive growing in his refrigerator. "This is the human the royal system ranks above me, a junior military officer barely into her 3rd decade. Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez," Jess said evenly. "And you are?" The shocked silence that followed was delicious. Several of Zythor's advisors made choking sounds. Even Krell'vik's antennae drooped in horror. "I am Emperor Zythor of House Aurelian, descendant of the pure bloodline, ruler of the celestial dominion for 3 millennia. My genetic profile has been the standard of excellence for—" "Yeah, that's great," Jess interrupted. "Look, Your Highness, we need to talk about this whole situation because I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding." "You dare interrupt?" Zythor began, then visibly struggled with something. His face contorted, and he looked genuinely confused. "I cannot complete aggressive gestures in your presence. The royal system's behavioral protocols are preventing me from asserting dominance. That's because the system ranked humans higher than your species," Eddie supplied helpfully. "Genetically speaking, you have to be polite to us. Must be weird for you." Zythor's glow intensified, which Jess interpreted as anger. "This is unacceptable. My bloodline has been refined over hundreds of generations. We are the pinnacle of genetic achievement. Your species is barely spacefaring. How could you possibly rank higher?" "Want the short version or the long version?" Jess asked. "Short version. Earth tried to kill us repeatedly for millions of years, and we survived through sheer stubborn chaos. Your royal system apparently likes that better than genetic perfection." That is absurd. Take it up with the billion-year-old AI that makes the rules. We didn't ask for this. Zythor paced, his robes swirling dramatically. The royal system cannot be wrong, but neither can it be right in this instance. There must be verification. Already verified, Krell'vik said quietly. Multiple scans confirm the human genetic signature exceeds all known parameters for noble classification. Then I invoke my right to challenge. Zythor turned to face Jess fully. The trials of succession, a sanctioned competition to prove genetic superiority through demonstration rather than scan alone. If your species truly deserves its ranking, prove it through action. Captain Webb stepped forward. Lieutenant Ramirez isn't authorized to accept challenges on behalf of humanity. Actually, Zorinthia spoke up from her seat. According to Royal System protocols, any member of the superior species can represent their entire genetic line in succession trials. It's how Zythor's own ancestors secured their position 12,000 years ago. Thank you, Lady Zorinthia, for that extremely unhelpful information, Jess muttered, always happy to contribute to chaos. Zythor's expression shifted to something resembling satisfaction. The trials consist of 3 tests: physical adaptation, mental flexibility, and survival synthesis. Each test measures genetic capacity to handle unexpected challenges. If your species is truly superior, you will prevail. If not, humanity will acknowledge my bloodline's supremacy. And if I refuse, then the royal system will interpret human authority as forfeit through cowardice. The galaxy will never respect your rule. Eddie leaned over to Jess. It's a trap. He's been engineered for this kind of thing. No way you win. But Jess was thinking about the thousands of ships in orbit, the species watching to see if humanity would lead or fold, and the fact that Zythor represented exactly the kind of entitled authority she'd joined the military to oppose. Okay, she said. I accept your challenge. Webb grabbed her arm. Lieutenant, that's an order. Stand down. With respect, Captain, I'm apparently galactic royalty now. Pretty sure I outrank you. She looked at Zythor. When do we start? Immediately. Zythor gestured, and his advisors began setting up equipment. The trials are administered by the royal system itself to ensure fairness. Prepare yourself, human. You may have superior genetics according to ancient scans, but I have 3,000 years of experience. Cool, Jess said. I have spite and a really bad attitude about being told what to do. Let's see which wins. The first trial appeared as a holographic environment. Jess and Zythor stood in a simulated ecosystem that kept shifting, desert to tundra, to ocean to volcanic wasteland, each change happening every 30 seconds. Physical adaptation, announced the royal system's neutral voice. Demonstrate genetic flexibility in hostile environments. Zythor moved with practiced precision. When the environment became frozen tundra, his body adjusted immediately, his skin generating heat patterns that insulated him. In the desert, he absorbed sunlight like a solar panel. Each adaptation was flawless, textbook genetic engineering in action. Jess, meanwhile, was improvising wildly. She built shelter in seconds using debris from the simulation, redirected water flow to create cooling systems, and when the environment shifted to a toxic swamp, she used Eddie's earlier comment about Earth being nightmare mode as inspiration. If growing up on a death world taught humanity anything, it was that survival wasn't about perfect adaptation, it was about creative problem solving. The trial ended in a draw. Zythor looked surprised. Jess was mostly surprised she'd survived. The second trial tested mental flexibility through an impossible logic puzzle that kept changing its rules. Zythor approached it methodically, his engineered brain processing variables at superhuman speed. But every time he got close to a solution, the parameters shifted. Jess gave up on logic entirely and started trying random combinations, treating it like a video game more than a test. When that didn't work, she asked the royal system if the puzzle even had a solution. It didn't. The test was about how long it took to recognize futility and adapt strategy. Jess won the second trial by calling bullshit and walking away to try something else. Zythor had spent 20 minutes pursuing a solution that didn't exist. That was cheating, he protested. That was adaptation, Jess countered. Sometimes the smart move is knowing when to quit. The third trial was the decider. A survival simulation where both competitors faced an evolving threat that learned from their responses. Zithor used his superior strength, speed, and advanced genetics to fight directly. He was magnificent to watch, like poetry written in violence and precise tactical decisions. The threat adapted, matching his strength, learning his patterns. Jess did what humans did best. She went weird. She used the environment creatively, made alliances with simulated creatures Zithor dismissed as irrelevant. And when the threat cornered her, she bluffed, making it think she had resources she didn't have. It was messy, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable. The threat couldn't adapt because it couldn't predict what random nonsense a human might try next. The trial ended. The Royal System's voice filled the room. Winner, Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez. Genetic analysis confirms. Humanity's superiority lies not in perfect adaptation, but in unpredictable creativity. This trait is deemed most valuable for leadership in chaotic systems. The ranking stands. Zithor stood silent for a long moment. Then slowly he laughed. It was a genuine sound, not bitter, but surprised. Your species won by being impossible to predict. That is either the most brilliant evolutionary strategy I've encountered or the most absurd, possibly both. We prefer the term charmingly chaotic, Eddie offered. Zithor looked at Jess with something approaching respect. Very well, Lieutenant. Humanity's rank is confirmed. What will you do with your authority? Jess smiled. That's the fun part. I'm going to give it away. The impromptu council chamber looked less like a seat of galactic power and more like a community meeting that got wildly out of hand. Representatives from 40 different species crowded into Outpost Artemis's largest conference room, which was designed for maybe 20 humans max. Krell'vik had given up on formal seating arrangements and was simply trying to prevent anyone from being accidentally crushed. Jess stood at the head of the room, a hastily prepared document displayed on every available screen. Captain Webb sat to her right, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. Eddie occupied the technical station, broadcasting the proceedings to the hundreds of ships still in orbit. Zorinthia had claimed a position directly behind Jess, radiating moral support and barely contained amusement. Emperor Zithor, to his credit, had taken a seat among the other delegates without complaint. Losing the challenge seemed to have shifted something in him. He looked less like an outraged monarch and more like someone who'd discovered his entire worldview needed updating. Okay, Jess began. Thank you all for coming to what I'm calling the emergency session of We Need to Fix This Ridiculous System. I'm going to be blunt because that's apparently humanity's whole thing. The Royal System ranking us as supreme genetic nobility is creating a situation nobody wants, including us. Murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. Krell'vik's antennae twitched nervously. The way I see it, Jess continued, we have a few options. Option 1. Humanity accepts authority over the celestial dominion and actually tries to run a galactic empire. This is a terrible idea because we can barely manage our own planet. Next. A few nervous laughs from the delegates who were starting to realize this wasn't a traditional political proceeding. Option 2. We challenge the Royal System's programming and try to delete humanity from the database. According to Krell'vik, this is impossible and would probably cause a galactic-level systems crash. Also terrible. Option 3, she said, pulling up the document she'd spent all night writing with Webb and Eddie's help. We acknowledge the Royal System's ranking, but completely restructure what that ranking means. I'm calling it the Accord of Mutual Non-Interference, but Eddie keeps referring to it as the Treaty of Please Leave Us Alone, which honestly captures the spirit better. Eddie gave a thumbs up from his station. It's catchier. Jess ignored him. Here's the core concept. The Royal System says humanity ranks highest. Fine, we accept that. But instead of using that authority to rule, we're using it to dissolve the hierarchical structure entirely. Every species gets full independence. No more genetic rankings determining political power. The Dominion becomes a voluntary alliance instead of an empire. The silence that followed was profound. Zithor stood slowly, his expression unreadable. You would surrender absolute authority to institute democracy. Democracy is one option. Each species can choose their own government structure. The point is self-determination. Jess met his glowing eyes. The royal system was designed to prevent chaos by imposing order, but it's been a billion years. Maybe the galaxy's ready to handle a little chaos if it means actual freedom. The system will not allow this, Krell'vik protested. Its fundamental programming requires hierarchical structure based on genetic rank. Actually, Eddie interjected, I've been analyzing the royal system's core code, and there's a fascinating loophole. The system's prime directive is to ensure capable leadership. It doesn't specify how that leadership must be exercised. If the highest-ranked species chooses to distribute authority rather than consolidate it, the system is bound to support that choice. Zorinthia leaned forward. You found a legal loophole in a billion-year-old AI's programming. I'm very good at my job. I'm beginning to see why the royal system ranked humans so highly, Zythor said dryly. He looked at the treaty displayed on the screens, reading through the provisions. This would fundamentally alter galactic governance. Species that have been subservient for millennia would gain immediate autonomy. The balance of power would shift overnight. Correct, Jess said. It'll be messy. There'll be disputes and adjustments and probably a lot of angry diplomatic meetings. But it's better than a system where your DNA determines whether you get freedom. A delegate from the Prismatic Collective, the crystal squid species from earlier, raised a tentacle. What of species that cannot govern themselves effectively? The royal system provided structure for a reason. Then those species can form alliances, join federations, or request assistance, Captain Webb answered. But it'll be their choice, not an imposition based on genetic ranking. Another delegate, this one resembling an animated boulder with eyes, rumbled a question. And what of humanity? If you dissolve the hierarchy, what role will you play? We'll be one species among many, Jess said. We'll trade, share technology, and participate in the galactic community as equals. The only special authority we're keeping is the one-time power to restructure this system. After that, we're just another member of the Alliance. Krell'vik was visibly struggling with the concept. This is unprecedented. In 1 billion years of royal system operation, no species has ever voluntarily reduced their own authority. Then it's about time someone did. Zythor studied Jess for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He smiled. Not a polite diplomatic gesture, but a genuine expression of respect. When I came here, I intended to prove the royal system's ranking was an error. Instead, I've discovered why it was correct. Only a species truly capable of leadership would recognize that the best way to lead is to empower others rather than dominate them. He turned to address the assembled delegates. I support the accord. My fleet will be the first to ratify it. The room erupted in debate. Some delegates cheered, others protested. Several species started arguing with each other about the implications. It was chaotic, messy, and completely democratic. Zorinthia touched Jess's shoulder. You just freed thousands of worlds from genetic tyranny. That's going to have consequences you can't predict. Yeah, probably, but staying under a system designed by ancient aliens who thought DNA should determine freedom has worse consequences. Jess watched the debating delegates. Besides, humans are good at dealing with unpredictable consequences. We've had a lot of practice. Over the next 6 hours, the treaty was debated, amended, and refined. Species proposed safeguards, suggested modifications, and argued about implementation timelines. It was the messiest political process Jess had ever witnessed, and it was beautiful because everyone had a voice. When the final vote came, the accord passed with overwhelming support. Not unanimous, but enough that the royal system's protocols accepted it as legitimate authority exercised by the highest-ranked species. The system's voice echoed through the station one final time. Accepted. Dominion hierarchical structure dissolved. Transition to voluntary alliance protocols initiated. Humanity's genetic ranking remains supreme, but authority distribution as specified is within acceptable parameters. This unit will continue to provide advisory services but will no longer enforce political hierarchy. Just like that, a billion-year-old empire became a voluntary coalition. Eddie started a slow clap that several other delegates picked up. Zythor approached Jess and offered a formal bow, though this one felt less like obligation and more like genuine respect. Your species is going to be simultaneously the most beloved and most frustrating presence in galactic politics, he told her. I look forward to seeing what chaos you create next. We're hoping for the boring kind of chaos, Jess said. Trade negotiations and cultural exchanges instead of empire management. With humans involved? Unlikely. But Zythor was smiling. As the delegates began filing out, already making plans to return home with the news, Jess felt the weight of the last 3 days start to lift. They'd stumbled into first contact, accidentally conquered an empire, and somehow used that authority to make things better instead of worse. Not bad for a boring Tuesday that went catastrophically sideways. 3 months later, Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez sat in the observation deck of Outpost Artemis, cataloging space debris with the enthusiasm of someone who'd developed a genuine appreciation for boring work. Another chunk of ice, she said into her recorder, logging the entry. Still revolutionary. Outpost Artemis had changed significantly since becoming humanity's accidental embassy to the galaxy. The station had been expanded 3 times, adding diplomatic quarters, cultural exchange facilities, and what Eddie insisted on calling the galaxy's weirdest bar. The crew had grown from 300 to nearly 2,000, with at least a third of those being alien representatives who'd decided Earth's approach to diplomacy was interesting enough to study up close. The observation deck door opened, and Krell'vik entered, carrying 2 cups. Your afternoon coffee, Lieutenant. Or should I say Ambassador Ramirez, given your official diplomatic status. Just Jess is fine, Krell, we've been over this. She accepted the coffee gratefully. Did you put that cinnamon stuff in it again? I have discovered that humans respond positively to what you call comfort spices. I am attempting to master your beverage preferences. Krell'vik settled into the seat beside her, his forearms managing his own cup with practiced ease. Also, I find the ritual soothing. Who knew the Dominion's former ambassador would develop an appreciation for coffee breaks? Jess smiled. 3 months ago, Krell'vik had been a rigid bureaucrat horrified by humanity's existence. Now he spent his afternoons discussing human culture with genuine interest and had developed strong opinions about Earth's coffee-growing regions. The transformation had been something to witness. How were the morning meetings? She asked. Chaotic. The Viridian Coalition is still arguing with the Crystalline Assembly about mining rights in the Outer Reach. The Thermal Collective wants to establish an embassy on Earth, which Captain Webb is diplomatically delaying because he's not sure how to explain the concept of bureaucratic paperwork to beings made of living plasma. And 3 more species have applied to join the alliance. So, a normal Tuesday. Indeed, though I must note that your definition of normal has significantly altered galactic standards. Krell'vik's antenna twitched with amusement. The galaxy is still adjusting to the concept that disputes can be resolved through discussion rather than genetic hierarchy determinations. The door opened again, and Zorinthia swept in with her characteristic grace. She'd taken up semi-permanent residence on the station, claiming she was there as a diplomatic liaison. In reality, she'd become Jess' closest friend, and seemed to genuinely enjoy watching humanity navigate galactic politics with what she called endearing incompetence. There you are, Zorinthia said, dropping into a seat. I've been looking everywhere. Eddie's hosting another cultural exchange night in the bar, and you're not going to believe what the methane breathers brought this time. Do I want to know? Their version of alcohol. It's technically a compressed gas that induces euphoria in species with compatible biochemistry. Eddie's already running safety protocols because the last thing we need is accidentally intoxicated diplomats. Jess laughed. Remember when this was just a research outpost? Barely. Now it's the most interesting diplomatic posting in the galaxy. My family keeps asking when I'm coming home, and I keep telling them I'm conducting vital research into human unpredictability. Is that what we're calling it? Well, I can't tell them the truth, which is that watching humans accidentally revolutionize galactic society is the most entertaining thing I've experienced in 3 centuries. Captain Webb's voice came through Jess's communicator. Lieutenant, we have a situation. Not an emergency, but you should probably get to the command deck. On my way, Captain. Jess stood, coffee in hand. What's the situation? We have a first contact scenario. A ship just appeared at the system's edge from a species not in the Royal System's database. They're confused about why everyone's treating humans like we're special. Jess exchanged glances with Krell'vik and Xerinthia. Here we go again. They arrived at the command deck to find Eddie at his station, grinning like someone had given him a new puzzle to solve. The main screen showed a vessel that looked like someone had crossed a nautilus shell with a cathedral. It was broadcasting standard greeting protocols in a language the station's computers were still translating. They're calling themselves the Spiral Collective, Eddie explained. Came from a region of space outside Dominion influence. They've been watching our broadcasts for the last month and wanted to make contact, but they're super confused about all the Supreme Authority stuff. Admiral Webb, recently promoted after the galactic restructuring, stood with his arms crossed. They're asking why their preliminary scans show humans registered as Tier Alpha Supreme in something called a Royal System, and why every other species they've encountered keeps deferring to our authority. Oh, this is going to be fun to explain, Xerinthia said. Jess took a deep breath and opened a channel. Spiral Collective Vessel, this is Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez of Outpost Artemis. Welcome to our corner of space. I apologize in advance because this explanation is going to sound completely insane. The response came through after the translation completed. The voice was melodious, curious, and slightly bewildered. Greetings, Lieutenant Ramirez. We are honored by your welcome. However, we must inquire about the unusual political structure we're observing. Multiple species have informed us that humans hold supreme authority, yet you appear to be a junior officer at a research station. This is confusing. Yeah, we get that a lot. Okay, here's the short version. About 3 months ago, humanity made first contact with a galactic empire that ranks species based on genetic analysis. Their billion-year-old AI decided Earth's chaotic evolution made us genetically superior to everyone else. We were suddenly in charge of thousands of worlds. That is remarkable. How do you manage such vast authority? We don't. We use that authority to dissolve the empire and turn it into a voluntary alliance where every species governs themselves. So technically, we're still ranked highest by the Royal System, but practically we're just another member species who happens to have been here first. A long pause. You were granted supreme authority over a galactic empire and immediately chose to dismantle hierarchical power structures in favor of egalitarian self-governance? Basically, yeah. Another pause, longer this time. Then, we would very much like to learn more about your species. This approach to power is unprecedented in our experience. Eddie leaned over to Jess. I think you just made friends. Permission to approach the station? The Spiral Collective asked. We believe cultural exchange with humanity would be valuable. Also, we have many questions about how you convinced an ancient AI to accept democratic reforms. Permission granted, Jess said. Dock at Bay 5. Fair warning, we're hosting something called a cultural exchange night in our bar area. It's going to be weird. We find weird to be acceptable. As the connection closed, Admiral Webb shook his head. 3 months and we've gone from isolated research outpost to the galaxy's most chaotic diplomatic hub. How does this keep happening? Because humans are genetically predisposed to turning boring Tuesdays into historical events, Eddie said. The Royal System said so. Krell'vik had been quiet, but now he spoke up. If I may observe, the Spiral Collective's reaction demonstrates something important. Humanity's approach to first contact, while unconventional, has established a precedent that species outside the Dominion find appealing. You are creating diplomatic bridges simply by being authentically yourselves. That's either a compliment or a warning, Jess said. Both, most likely. Xerinthia moved to the viewport, watching the Spiral Collective's ship approach. You know what's interesting? 3 months ago, the galaxy was governed by genetic determinism, enforced by ancient technology. Now it's a coalition where species are joining because they actually want to, not because they're forced to, and it all happened because one human refused to accept authority she didn't ask for. Don't give me too much credit. I just didn't want to do paperwork for 47,000 star systems. And yet, you've been doing diplomatic paperwork for 3 months. Yeah, but it's different when everyone has a choice. Makes the paperwork less soul-crushing. The Spiral Collective docked smoothly. Within an hour, their delegation was in Eddie's bar, attempting to understand why the methane breathers thought compressed euphoria gas was appropriate for casual social gatherings. Someone had introduced them to Zethor, who'd started visiting the station monthly to what he called monitor the democratic transition, though everyone knew he was actually enjoying being part of something new instead of maintaining tradition. Jess watched from the bar's entrance as the former emperor of the Celestial Dominion explained human coffee culture to beings who communicated through harmonic resonance. Zarinthia was teaching a group of prismatic collective members Earth card games. Krell'vik was deep in discussion with the Spiral Collective's philosopher about governance theory, and Eddie was somehow managing to keep everyone from accidentally poisoning each other with incompatible biochemistry. It was chaos. It was messy. It was completely unpredictable. It was exactly what humanity brought to the galaxy. Admiral Webb joined her, 2 coffee cups in hand. He offered one to Jess. "Remember when you complained about cataloging space debris being boring?" "I miss boring," Jess said, but she was smiling. Boring was simpler. Boring was also lonely. Now we've got friends from 1,000 different worlds, an alliance built on actual choice instead of genetic programming, and regular visits from a reformed emperor who's developed opinions about coffee beans. When you put it that way, it sounds almost reasonable. Nothing about this situation is reasonable, Lieutenant. That's why it works. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the cultural exchange unfold with all its beautiful, chaotic inefficiency. Somewhere in the crowd, someone started singing, which prompted a harmonic response from the Spiral Collective, which inspired a prismatic to create light patterns, which made everyone else join in until the bar had accidentally created the galaxy's first impromptu interspecies musical collaboration. Jess's communicator buzzed. A message from Earth. "Congratulations on the Spiral Collective contact. How does it feel to be humanity's face of first contact 3 times in 3 months?" She typed back, like I should have called in sick more often. But she was grinning as she wrote it. The royal system had analyzed her DNA and bowed to Earth's authority. Humanity had taken that authority and used it to free a galaxy from 1 billion years of genetic determinism. And now, 3 months later, they were hosting the universe's weirdest cultural exchange in a bar that technically wasn't rated for half these species' biochemistry. It wasn't the first contact scenario anyone had predicted. It wasn't the diplomatic approach anyone had planned. But it was undeniably, chaotically, and stubbornly human. And somehow, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Jess raised her coffee cup toward the viewport, where stars and ships mingled in the darkness. "Here's to boring Tuesdays that go catastrophically right." Admiral Webb clinked his cup against hers. "And to humanity's continued tradition of accidentally improving things by refusing to do them properly." "I'll drink to that." In the bar behind them, someone had convinced Zethor to try karaoke. The sound of a 3,000-year-old emperor attempting Earth pop music would haunt Jess's dreams, but it would also remind her that sometimes the best way to unite a galaxy wasn't through perfect diplomacy or genetic superiority. Sometimes you just needed coffee, chaos, and the kind of stubborn optimism that came from surviving on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill you. The royal system had recognized that trait as supreme nobility. Humanity had recognized it as just another Tuesday. Both were correct.